So you're saying I'm supposed to sign here in blood? We'll get back to it. Today, we're going to be reviewing the Lost Omens Legends book for Pathfinder 2nd Edition on this episode of The Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Mark and I am the Local Disaster Tour Guide. That's right, I'm just your average everyday storyteller who knows this important truth: never give the important NPCs stats, because if you give them stats, that just means your player characters can kill them. Welcome to my channel where we talk about role-playing games like Pathfinder and Starfinder. Today we're going to be doing another The Local Disaster Tour Guide reviews video, and we're going to be returning to the Lost Omens series for Pathfinder 2nd Edition with the book Lost Omens Legends. So the Lost Omens series is a series of hardback books for Pathfinder 2nd Edition that are specifically designed to offer information about the Golarion Campaign Setting that is the main campaign setting for Pathfinder 2e. This is the fourth book in the series. The first three books were the Lost Omens World Guide, the Lost Omens Character Guide, and Lost Omens Gods and Magic. And this is the fourth journey into the Golarion setting that Paizo has released in this edition. This book offers 42 entries on some of the big political movers and shakers in the Golarion campaign setting. It gives you some insights into some of the intrigue and some of the bigger storylines that are happening in Golarion, and hopefully will serve as a seed for some possible adventures that storytellers might want to use. Finally, at several points in this book, Paizo has offered different pieces of crunch, whether it's items or feats or just different things that you can potentially bring into your game that represent the flavor of the Golarion campaign setting. So, what do I think of this book? And is this something that you might like to have at your gaming table? Well, let's get started. So there's a few things that I want to remind you just as we get started on this review. Number one, on any review that I offer, I always give you this grain of salt. Please remember that I am just some random guy on the internet. I will do my best to offer my thoughts about this product, but my opinion is just that, it's an opinion. And the best review that you can possibly get is to look at this product for yourself. As such, I always recommend, if you have the opportunity to look over this product for yourself, maybe borrow it from a friend or read through it a little bit in a local bookstore, I would highly recommend that. It is always best to check out a product for yourself before making a purchase decision. Hopefully, I can give you some insights about the strengths and weaknesses of this product, but I definitely recommend, if you can check it out for yourself, you want to do that before deciding if you'd like to buy. Also, since this book is the fourth book in a series, the Lost Omens Campaign Setting for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, I will go ahead and tell you that it is important to realize that this book exists in the context of other books in the series. I have reviewed the other three Lost Omens books. I'm new to YouTube, but I'm going to try to throw a link to that video up here somewhere. This should be a fun mechanical experiment. But if you want some context for the review I'm about to give, it might be worthwhile to go and check out that other video as well, and that may help you understand some of the things that I'm going to say about this particular book. Finally, in all of my reviews, I like to begin at the end. I want to give you my final thoughts about this book, and then I will work my way through the review so that you can understand how I came to that conclusion. With that in mind, let's go ahead and grade this book. My grade for the Lost Omens Legends book is a D+, maybe a C-. I'm going to be honest, I don't particularly like this book. So as a quick summary of my thoughts on Lost Omens Legends, there is some fun and interesting material in this book. I do think that there are some engaging ideas that Paizo has brought to the table here, but ultimately, this book lacks the real substance that I was looking for. This is a hardback book, but it kind of feels like some of the old softback splat books that Paizo used to do during first edition. This book really does not stand on its own. I feel like the material in this book is spread far too thin, and I feel like Paizo didn't go far enough in adding elements to this book that will make you actually pull it off of your shelf maybe more than once or twice. Ultimately, this is going to be a disappointing product. So, let me get into the review and let me talk about why I ultimately am not very happy with Lost Omens Legends. If you watched my other video on the other 3 Lost Omens books, you know that this is a series that really didn't get off to a good start with me. When I graded the other 3 books, Lost Omens Gods and Magic was the only book that got a decent grade for me. I gave that one a B. I gave the character guide a C, and I actually gave the world guide a D. Overall, this series hasn't been a very good series in my evaluation, and Lost Omens Legends is definitely pulling that average down. If I had to rank Lost Omens Legends compared to the other 3 books, I would say it's a little bit better than the Lost Omens World Guide, and a little bit worse than the Lost Omens Character Guide. So it's right in that D+, C- range, and I really went back and forth trying to decide where I should evaluate it, but ultimately I settled on a D+, because at the end of the day, I don't feel like this is a book that I'm going to get off my shelf very often. And as such, it's not really a purchase that I'm happy that I made. So the Lost Omens series has ultimately had 2 different problems that have kind of dragged the books down for me, and I feel like Lost Omens Legends continues that pattern. The first problem is the material always feels spread far too thin. In every book, with the possible exception of Lost Omens Gods and Magic, it just feels like they tried to cover too wide of an area and tried to hit too many different things, resulting in a product that feels like it just jumps from point to point or moment to moment and really leaves you with very little that you can latch onto. It may give you a good big picture perspective, but when you're zooming in on the details that make a campaign, these products have always fallen short. Another issue that I've had with the Lost Omens line is it's only 4 books into the series, and I can already tell that they are deliberately making these books interdependent rather than interconnected. Let me explain what I mean. In the Lost Omens World Guide, there were several archetypes that were printed representing different characters that might exist in different regions of the Golarion Campaign Setting. Later, in the Lost Omens Character Guide, they had an organizations section that represented some of the organizations that you could join if you were playing a character in the Golarion setting. And in that second book, the Character Guide, some of the options in that book required you to have access to options in the World Guide. In other words, there were sections of the Lost Omens Character Guide that you couldn't use unless you had another book previously purchased. The books were interdependent. If you want to use one, you have to have both. Well, let me just go ahead and say, when it comes to Lost Omens Legends, both of those criticisms that I have given of this series as a whole definitely apply to this book. Let me dig into the negatives that you are going to see if you purchase Lost Omens Legends. So let's go ahead and talk about spreading the material far too thin. Lost Omens Legends is 123 pages, and it covers 42 of the major political figures, the leaders, the movers and shakers of the Golarion Campaign Setting, and if you run the numbers on that, that is less than 3 pages of information on each of the figures or entries in this particular book. And remember, that average of less than 3 pages, it's competing with all of the artwork. It's competing with all of the mechanical crunch that's been included in this book. It is fighting for space with material that theoretically you're going to want to use in your game. Ultimately, you're looking at a page and a half, maybe 2 pages per entry of actual information about the leaders. And to be honest, I feel like I could have gotten most of this from a Pathfinder wiki. I don't know why I needed a hardback book for a page and a half of information on political figures in the Golarion setting. It just seems too thin. For a book that presents itself as a guide to the politics of the Golarion Campaign Setting, there's not a lot here. Well, I guess there's a lot here, but there's not a lot you can do with it. That might be a better way to say that. This issue of spreading too thin also applies to the crunch of the book. For those of you who aren't familiar with the term, crunch refers to mechanical elements that might show up in a game. So that might be a feat that a particular class could take, or an item that a particular character could use. Paizo, in marketing this book, really tried to sell the idea that they were including crunchy elements of the game that your characters could take advantage of in meeting with these particular characters, with these leaders in the setting. Well, I counted. There are 17 crunchy segments in this book out of 42 political entries. Basically, they didn't have enough space to put very much in here. That ratio works out to about 40% of the actual entries have something for your player characters. Less than half of these entries offer anything to your players. And what's worse is some of the entries are probably never going to be used. Don't get me wrong, I think the new Hobgoblin nation that's being led by Xerxes is interesting, but the level 18 item that is associated with that entry, if my players aren't in Xerxes' kingdom at level 18 or above, they're probably never going to see that. It's such a small element and it's so specific, I feel like it's functionally useless. And that's kind of a common criticism I could give to a lot of the crunch in this book. I'd say about half of the crunchy elements are so specific or so limited that ultimately I feel like they're probably never going to see the light of day in a campaign. And when half of your player material is probably too niche to be useful, you've created a book that's not going to come off of your bookshelf. It really just feels like it's not enough. But on top of that, you don't just have a book that spreads itself too thin, you also have a book that is once again interdependent with other books to even be useful. For example, in Lost Omens Legends, one of the movers and shakers that they talk about is the leader of the Red Mantis Assassins Guild. So naturally, they have rules options and elements that you would associate with the Red Mantis Assassins Guild. Things that player characters could potentially take. And those rules elements refer back to the Lost Omens World Guide. And they refer back to the Lost Omens Character Guide. It's the same thing for some of the Last Wall Century character elements as well. There are several places in this book where if you even want to use the material, you need an entire separate book to gain any benefit. And please allow me to clarify, there is a difference between interconnected books and interdependent books. Interconnected books, you can see how the options would fit together, but you don't need both books to use the options in either book. It really bothers me that the Lost Omens line is proving to be a series of products where you really have to have all of the books to use any of the books. That just disappoints me. So at the end of the day, I kind of end up feeling like this book fails to offer the things that it tried to offer. Another good example would be Paizo really spun up the idea of insights into the political intrigue of the Golarion Campaign Setting. I remember seeing several interviews where they really talked up if you were interested in a very political or intrigue-heavy campaign set in Golarion, you were going to get a lot of details to help you run those types of games. Let me show you. This is their political intrigue section. 2 pages, 6 plot lines. And if I'm being honest, one of the plot lines, the Mother of Medicine plot line, you have people trying to assassinate a doctor, but they don't even explain why. This was their political intrigue book? No, it wasn't. The information in this book really just didn't get there for me. If you're going to sell me on insight into the major political figures, you got to give me more than a page and a half, maybe 2 pages. You got to give me some serious insight into who that character is and what that character is trying to do. If you're going to give me rewards for being involved in the Golarion setting, they have to be meaningful rewards. And if you're going to give me political intrigue, I'm sorry, but you got to give me more than 2 paragraphs of political intrigue. If you're trying to assassinate someone, tell me why? This book really didn't get there for me. I'm sorry to say it, but Paizo, your Lost Omens line, it started off poorly. It got decent with Gods and Magic, but it looks like it's going back downhill again. Now, I will say this book is not all bad. Notice I didn't give the book an F. I even said that this is a little bit better than the Lost Omens World Guide. There is some material here that I did enjoy. In fact, I'm going to tell you all 5 things that I liked in this book, so you know exactly what kind of good material you can hope to find. First off, number 5 on the list of best things in the Lost Omens Legends book, I have recently been making an effort to be more mindful about paying attention to artwork inside of role-playing products, and I do have to give Paizo credit. The Hobgoblin Diplomacy handout, which is found on page 29, that was hilarious. You got a genuine laugh out of me, so bravo for that. That was funny. Number 4, I really enjoyed the entry on Ardax the Whitehair and the Hold of Belskin and what's going on with the orcs with the invasion of the Whispering Tyrant. I think that that is extremely well written. I was kind of wondering where that story was going to go now that the Whispering Tyrant is back, and I think you guys have done a fantastic job with that. That is actually very interesting and has given me some good seeds that I think I will probably use in a future campaign, so that was a good entry there. Number 3, Baba Yaga. One of the recent releases for Paizo is the Advanced Player's Guide. I'm working on that review now. And in the Advanced Player's Guide, they released a new class, the Witch, which has a Witch's Patron. And Lost Omens Legends gives you Baba Yaga as a Witch's Patron, including a unique Witch's Hex that Baba Yaga can teach you. Okay, Paizo, bravo, I give you credit. That is an interesting choice and an excellent way to tie someone in to the Golarion setting, so I did enjoy that section. And then for number 2 and number 1, I'm going to go ahead and say, interestingly enough, The best elements in this book are literally at the very beginning and the very end of Lost Omens Legends. I'm serious, my two favorite pieces of material that you can find in this book are found bookending everything else. It's almost like Paizo came up with a fantastic opener, a fantastic finisher, and forgot to put any meat in the middle of that. Just good bookends, terrible in the middle. For number 2, at the end of the book, they give you stats for genie-touched companions. If you are playing a character who has a companion creature, such as a champion's mount or a druid's animal companion, you now have the option to create genie-touched versions of your companion, giving them special elemental powers. And if I'm being honest, from a player character perspective, this is the best thing in the book. This is a piece of material I actually feel might see some play at my gaming table. If Lost Omens Legends ever comes off my bookshelf, it is strongly likely that it's because someone wants a genie-touched companion of one kind or another. But then, my number one favorite thing in Lost Omens Legend, the material that the book opens with, infernal contracts. So this is a famous trope in fantasy role-playing games, and I have seen concepts like this so many times before that I am honestly surprised I've never seen someone stat it up for a game. Paizo has actually given 3 different examples of how to do infernal contracts in a game, and oh my, does this open up some really interesting story possibilities. I feel like the vast majority of player characters will never have any use for these items, but as a storyteller, if you're looking for some interesting story seeds, the fact that infernal contracts now exist and they have a specific way to build and use them in-game, that is beautiful, and I really, really appreciate that. When I first opened Lost Omens Legends and saw that in the very first entry, I really had high hopes for this book, and I kind of wish they had kept that quality going. So, that kind of covers my thoughts on Lost Omens Legends. This book had some good ideas, but it just really failed to execute at a level where I feel like I'm going to get any reasonable value at my gaming table. There's some interesting seeds here, sure, but I feel like I already know what I need to know, and I feel like this book is probably just going to sit on my shelf for the rest of its life. And that disappoints me. I said in my previous video on the Lost Omens series that if you are considering investing in the Lost Omens series, that you really have to look at the series as a whole. Gods and Magic can stand on its own. But the other 3 books, World Guide, Character Guide, and now Lost Omens Legends, they are really books where you either plan to get all 3 or probably shouldn't get any of them at all. I will say this, players, don't buy into this series. This series, at least for now, is definitely Game Master focused content, and Game Masters, you're the ones who have to decide if this is material that you want, if these are books that would be valuable to you. If you are a new Game Master who hasn't spent a lot of time in Pathfinder 1st Edition, this series might be a really good starting place for you. Again, this series does give you a good big picture, even if the smaller details are lacking. But Game Masters, if you want to consider this series, I strongly, strongly encourage you, do not buy this book until you have had time to look over this book for yourself, because as it stands, the Lost Omens series has been a really weak series of products. Now, let me speak to Paizo directly. I know that this is a small channel, and I realize you may not even know this channel exists or see anything that I do. Paizo, you have a good campaign setting. You do. And the story beats that you are hitting with your campaign setting are very engaging. I love a lot of the stuff that is going on with the Whispering Tyrant. I love several of the changes you've made to your setting and some of the ways you've twisted your story around. There is a lot of exciting stuff happening. You're just not selling it well. It really breaks my heart. In Pathfinder 1st Edition, I remember seeing a lot of stuff online where there were people who they hated 1st Edition. They tore it down, they took shots at it all the time. There were people who couldn't say anything nice about Pathfinder 1st Edition, but if you brought up the Golarion Campaign Setting, they would stop and be like, well, okay, we like that. Paizo, you have developed a really interesting campaign setting, but your Lost Omens line just isn't presenting it well. I know you can do better. I do have some hope for this series. You've got a couple of books coming out. One is the Lost Omens Pathfinder Society Guide, and the other is the Lost Omens Ancestry Guide. And those books give me some hope. First off, I think I've seen indications that you plan on making the books a little bit bigger. Good start. And it looks like you're focusing your content more. Gods and Magic, I think one of its strengths was the fact that it really focused in on a particular topic and allowed you to get some depth on the material. I'm really hoping that your future installments in this series go in that direction. And also, Paizo, if you see this channel, please stop making it where the material in one book is useless unless you have another book as well. That interdependency on the books really makes it where investing in this series is all or none, and I feel like none's the better option right now. Make books that are strong enough to stand on their own. I know you have a setting that can sustain those kinds of products, and I really, really hope to see higher quality products in this series in the future. But let me throw it over to you. Have you had a chance to look through Lost Omens Legends? Are there any characters in this book that you find particularly engaging or interesting? Are there any plot lines that you find particularly compelling that you might like to use at your gaming table? Or are there particular pieces of mechanical crunch that you can't wait to offer your players? Let me know what you thought about Lost Omens Legends and leave a comment down below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe. Please feel free to share this video and help the conversation to grow. Thank you very much for joining me, and have a wonderful day.